Tears and silence filled the church in South Minneapolis. Annunciation Catholic School had just begun its first week of classes. The walls still held the laughter of children returning from summer. Photographs posted days earlier showed students smiling with their new backpacks, eager to step into the rhythm of learning once again. Yet within minutes, that innocence was shattered. A man dressed in black with a rifle fired through the church windows into the pews where children sat. 30 to 50 rounds ripped through stained glass and wooden benches. Teachers pulled students to the floor. Older children shielded the younger. Some prayed, some froze, some never rose again. 2 children died that morning. One 8 years old and the other 10. 17 more were wounded. The gunman, 23-year-old Robin Westman, ended his own life. His plan was laid out on his bed. Rifles, ammunition, a crude drawing of the church stabbed with a knife, and a 4-page letter admitting that he was not well, that he knew what he was doing was wrong, yet that he could not stop himself. This scene has become a pattern in the United States. Each new tragedy carries the same elements. The urgency of breaking news alerts, frantic parents rushing to schools, weeping politicians speaking of prayers and reform, and the nation asking how it can happen again. In this case, the mayor of Minneapolis wept openly. He spoke of children who should be playing on the playground rather than hiding beneath pews. He called for peace in schools and churches, places once assumed to be untouchable. Yet, beneath the words lies the reality that these massacres repeat with a frequency that has hardened the American public into a grim familiarity. To analyze this incident, one must look beyond the immediate heartbreak. The American debate over mass shootings has lasted decades, yet each new event exposes the same fractures. At one level, it is a matter of individual pathology. Westman's letter confirms that he perceived himself as unstable. He had no criminal history, he gave no official warning to authorities. But he documented his preparation through drawings and online posts that later disappeared. In many cases, these shooters broadcast their intentions in cryptic or overt ways, leaving behind digital trails that reveal their descent into violence. The inability to intercept those signals is a recurring weakness in both community awareness and law enforcement practice. At another level, the ease of access to high-capacity firearms magnifies the damage. In the United States, rifles capable of releasing dozens of rounds in seconds are available with relative ease compared to most developed nations. A man with no criminal background and no visible extremist ties can accumulate weapons without triggering meaningful scrutiny. The Annunciation case underlines this systemic gap. Westman's family background was not radical. His mother had worked at the church until her retirement in 2021. This was not a figure emerging from organized crime or militant ideology. He was the embodiment of the lone actor, one individual with access to lethal force, sufficient to destabilize an entire community. This lone actor model has become one of the most destabilizing forms of violence in the modern West. Unlike terrorism conducted by foreign networks, these attacks are rooted in domestic alienation. They do not require foreign funding, training camps, or supply chains. They require only a grievance or mental instability, paired with a weapon. This asymmetry makes prevention extraordinarily difficult. It also creates an image abroad of a superpower unable to protect its own children in its own schools. For allies and adversaries alike, that vulnerability has meaning. The geopolitical implications should not be dismissed. Nations measure the credibility of others, not only by military strength, but by internal cohesion. For decades, the United States has projected itself as a guardian of security in Europe, in Asia, and across global trade routes. Yet images of children hiding under desks or bleeding in pews erode that projection. Foreign media amplify these events to question American governance. Adversaries use them as evidence that American democracy is fractured, unable to reconcile basic public safety with constitutional freedoms. When China or Russia seek to discredit American criticism of their own human rights abuses, they point to mass shootings in American schools as symbols of hypocrisy. Domestically, the repetition of these attacks fuels political division. Calls for stricter gun control encounter immediate resistance from defenders of the Second Amendment. Every new massacre becomes a battlefield of policy proposals and cultural identity. In Minneapolis, the immediate demand for restrictions was met by counterarguments that restrictions would not have prevented this shooter, who had no prior record. Thus, the cycle continues. Dead children become symbols in a war of narratives. No compromise seems politically possible, and as each side entrenches further, the probability of substantive reform diminishes. Historically, one must recognize the roots of the American relationship with firearms. Unlike many developed nations, the United States was founded on a frontier culture where armed citizens were both defenders and settlers. Firearms became woven into the mythology of independence. This historical legacy translates into a constitutional structure where the right to bear arms is seen not merely as a practical matter, but as a cultural cornerstone. The modern reality, however, is that advanced semi-automatic weapons now magnify the destructive capacity of individuals far beyond what the framers of the Constitution could have imagined. The frontier rifle has evolved into the assault-style weapon, and with it, the ability of one person to massacre dozens within minutes. The Annunciation shooting becomes another illustration of this historical tension between heritage and modernity. From a strategic standpoint, the persistence of school shootings also has implications for law enforcement and emergency response. In Minneapolis, teachers and students responded within seconds, following drills that have become routine across American schools. Children in the United States now learn lockdown procedures as part of their education, just as they once learned fire drills. The normalization of such practices reflects a society adapting to an ongoing threat rather than eliminating it. Emergency responders arrive quickly, but the critical minutes belong to teachers and students themselves. In this case, their actions saved lives, but they also symbolize a nation resigned to prevention through preparation rather than prevention through resolution. One must consider the psychological burden of this environment. A generation of American children has grown up with the expectation that their classrooms could become killing grounds. The trauma is not only for those directly attacked, but for millions who absorb the news repeatedly, year after year. Sociologists warn of a desensitization process where violence becomes background noise. Yet at the same time, parents live with persistent anxiety that any ordinary morning drop-off could be the last. This tension corrodes trust in institutions. It widens the gap between official promises of safety and lived reality. Globally, the repetition of these events alters how the United States is perceived. Allies may sympathize, but they also note the inability of the American system to correct what appears as a systemic flaw. Rival powers weaponize the narrative. When the United States lectures other governments about protecting civilians, they answer with images of American children running from classrooms. This weakens diplomatic credibility. It also complicates efforts to present American democracy as a model for others. The Annunciation tragedy thus becomes more than a local event. It is a microcosm of a national failure, and that failure projects outward into the global arena. Each bullet fired in Minneapolis echoes in debates about American decline, about domestic division, and about the credibility of American governance. The tears of parents and the silence of classrooms become data points in geopolitical analysis. The pattern is not random, it is structural, and until the structure changes, the cycle will continue. From this perspective, the question is not only how many children will die, but how many such events a society can absorb before its cohesion fractures. History shows that empires fall not only from foreign invasion, but from internal decay. The United States remains militarily dominant, but images of its own citizens under fire from within speak to a deeper erosion. Adversaries observe carefully. Allies grow uneasy. And the American people themselves wrestle with the paradox of liberty that permits chaos. The Minneapolis school shooting joins a long line of tragedies that mark the American landscape. Each one begins with the same words: breaking news, active shooter, children at risk. Each one ends with the same sequence: vigils, speeches, promises. But between those bookends lies the reality of a nation unable to reconcile freedom with security. For those analyzing geopolitics, this is not a matter of sentiment. It is a matter of structural stability. And structural stability is the foundation of power. Without it, even the strongest military cannot secure credibility abroad. Thus, when the shots rang out at Annunciation Church, their reverberations extended far beyond Minneapolis. They traveled through television screens into American living rooms. They traveled through international broadcasts into foreign capitals. They traveled into the calculations of adversaries and the doubts of allies. And they left behind 2 dead children, 17 wounded, and a nation once again asking why. The answer is complex, but the pattern is clear. And until the United States confronts the structural roots of this violence, the world will continue to witness the same scene: tears, silence, and the question of how a superpower cannot protect its own.